Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I hadn't been back to Shiprock in nearly 12 years. It wasn't something I'd planned. Life in Albuquerque just sort of swept me away from my roots, slowly replacing memories of the reservation with city noise and traffic lights. My grandmother, Dushi, would call every few weeks and gently nudge me about visiting, but I'd always find an excuse. Work, life, obligations. The truth was something always held me back, something I could never quite explain, a knot in my stomach that tightened whenever I thought about returning. But now here I was, rolling down dusty Highway 491 with Maya in the passenger seat, her camera already poised in her lap. She was excited, had been for weeks. Her smile was bright and eager, her hazel eyes sparkling with curiosity as she watched the landscape transform from city sprawl to endless desert. She had insisted on this trip for months, determined to finally meet my family and see the land I came from. I loved her for that persistence, even as dread coiled tighter in my chest with every mile marker we passed. We passed small clusters of houses along the highway, single-wide trailers and weathered cinder-block homes, all coated in the persistent rusty film of desert dust. Some had goats tied in the yards, others had old cars rusting beside makeshift clotheslines where laundry snapped in the hot wind. Maya took it all in quietly, respectfully. I stole glances at her, trying to read what she thought of this stark place that was so different from her own upbringing in Washington. She'd grown up in suburbs with green lawns and coffee shops on every corner. This was a world away from that comfort. Shiprock Peak rose abruptly from the horizon as we turned off toward the reservation. Its jagged silhouette stabbed into the sky, dark and imposing against the soft glow of late afternoon. The formation looked like the fin of some massive stone beast breaking through the Earth's surface, volcanic rock twisted into impossible angles. Seeing it again brought back old feelings, ones I'd buried years ago, awe mixed with something heavier, something uncomfortable, that made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. "That's it," I murmured, nodding toward the monolith. Maya leaned forward, eyes wide. "Wow, pictures really don't do it justice. It feels different seeing it in person. It's sacred to our people," I explained, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "We call it Sebitai, the rock with wings. It's an ancient volcanic plug. No one's supposed to climb it or get too close." She nodded slowly, still staring at the formation. "It's beautiful. Beautiful and dangerous," I added, feeling tension tighten my throat. "Things happen around here sometimes. Strange things." She turned to me, eyebrows raised, clearly intrigued. "Strange like what?" I shook my head slightly, not ready to explain. "Nothing. Just old stories." We arrived at my grandmother's home just before sunset. The small house, isolated at the end of a dusty dirt road, was exactly as I remembered it. Blue curtains hung in the windows, white paint peeled from the wooden siding, and the smell of sage and juniper smoke drifted from somewhere inside. The yard was swept clean, traditional style, and a small hogan stood behind the main house, its door facing east as it should. When Doshi stepped outside, her gray hair tied neatly behind her head in traditional fashion. She smiled and hugged me, patting my back with frail but strong hands. She whispered softly in Navajo, welcoming me home with words I barely remembered. Then she turned toward Maya. Her warm eyes flickered briefly with something cautious, concern, maybe, or appraisal, before she embraced her gently. "Welcome to our home," she said in accented English. Dinner was mutton stew, fry bread, and quiet conversation. Maya asked questions, polite and curious about our family history, the old ways and traditions. My grandmother answered kindly but carefully, never revealing too much, speaking in that measured way elders do when they're weighing every word. I noticed she kept glancing at me throughout the meal, her eyes searching my face as if looking for something. When the meal ended and Maya had excused herself to use the bathroom, my grandmother caught my eye across the table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Stay close to the house after dark," she said softly, barely louder than a whisper. Her eyes were serious now, urgent. "It's safer here, within the protective circle. Don't wander." Don't go near the peak. Grandmother, I'm not a child anymore. You were a child last time, she interrupted, her voice sharp. You were a child, and you don't remember what happened. But I do. I remember finding clothes that weren't yours. I remember your eyes when you came back. She leaned forward, her weathered hand gripping mine with surprising strength. It remembers you too. It's been waiting. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I wanted to dismiss her words as superstition, the way I had for years in the city. But sitting here in this house with darkness gathering outside, I couldn't find the certainty I needed. What if Maya wants to see the peak? I asked quietly. My grandmother's face hardened. Then you tell her no. You tell her it's dangerous. You don't let her curiosity lead you both into darkness. She released my hand and stood slowly. I'm an old woman. I won't be here forever to protect this family. You need to listen while you still can. Later that night, alone in the bedroom where I'd grown up, Maya quietly examined faded pictures on the wall while I unpacked our bags. The room was exactly as I'd left it. A twin bed with a faded quilt, a small dresser, posters of basketball players I'd admired as a teenager. It felt surreal being back here as an adult, like stepping into a memory that shouldn't exist anymore. Maya picked up a photograph that had been tucked behind the dresser, half hidden in shadow. Who's this? I turned to look. It was me, around 8 or 9 years old, standing near Shiprock Peak. But something was wrong with the photo. The corner was blackened and curled, as if it had been burned or exposed to intense heat. More disturbing was the expression on my young face, blank, empty like a doll's face. My eyes in the photograph looked hollow, unfocused. What happened here? Maya asked, handing it to me. I took the photo, staring down at the young boy in it, and felt cold spread through my chest. I didn't remember this picture being taken. Couldn't remember that day at all, actually. There was a gap in my childhood memories, a space of time that felt like static when I tried to access it. Nothing. Probably got too close to a candle or something, I said. But my voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. I set it back down quickly, suddenly not wanting to touch it. Maya watched me, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Are you okay? She asked softly. Fine, just tired from the drive. But that night, sleep came slowly. I lay in the darkness listening to unfamiliar sounds, the wind moving around the house, distant dogs barking, something else I couldn't identify. Maya slept peacefully beside me, her breathing deep and even, but I stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I dreamed of standing near Shiprock Peak at night, watching myself walk away into the darkness. When morning came, Maya's curiosity about Shiprock Peak had only grown stronger. Over breakfast, eggs, and more fry bread, which my grandmother made fresh and hot, Maya finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Can we go out there later? Just close enough for pictures? She looked between me and my grandmother. I promise we won't get close. I just want to see it properly, at sunset maybe. The light would be incredible. I hesitated, my grandmother's warnings echoing in my mind. We shouldn't. Why not? Maya pressed gently. People visit it all the time. I saw it in guidebooks. There's even a scenic overlook. Those people don't understand what it means, my grandmother said quietly, not looking up from her coffee. They take pictures and leave. They don't listen when the land tells them to stay away. Maya looked confused but respectful. I don't want to disrespect anything. I just thought, it's okay, I interrupted, already feeling guilty for making her uncomfortable. We can go, just for pictures. We'll stay back from the formation itself. My grandmother's eyes snapped to mine, disappointment clear in her expression. She said nothing, but I felt the weight of her disapproval. After breakfast, she followed me outside while Maya was in the bathroom. You're making a mistake, she said simply. That girl doesn't understand what lives out there, and you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten anything, I said, more defensively than I intended. I'm an adult now. I can be rational about this. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into my palm. Take this, corn pollen. If anything happens, anything at all, you scatter it and you run. You don't look back. You don't try to understand. You just run. The pouch felt heavier than it should have, weighted with meaning. I didn't want to acknowledge. Nothing's going to happen. That's what you said before, she whispered. When you were 8 years old and you begged to go play near the peak. That's what you said then too. Late in the afternoon, we drove out along the empty highway. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. Maya had her camera ready, checking settings, talking about composition and light. Her excitement was infectious, and for a moment I let myself believe this would be fine. Just a normal sunset photo shoot. Nothing more. We parked in a gravel turnout about half a mile from the peak. The area was deserted. No other cars, no tourists. Just us and the vast emptiness of the high desert. As we stepped out of the car, the heat hit us immediately. That dry, baking warmth that makes sweat evaporate before you feel it. "Stay close to me," I said, more sharply than I intended. Maya gave me a strange look, but nodded. Of course. We followed a narrow dirt path away from the road, moving slowly toward a better vantage point. Maya stopped every few feet to take photos, crouching low to capture different angles. I kept glancing back at the car, measuring the distance, calculating how quickly we could return if needed. The air grew still as we walked, that peculiar desert stillness that feels like the world holding its breath. Even the constant wind had died completely. In the distance, Shiprock Peak loomed larger, its dark rock faces catching the last direct sunlight. Shadows pooled in its crevices, making the formation look hollow, like something had been carved out of the earth rather than pushed up through it. "This is perfect," Maya said, setting up for another shot. "The light is incredible." But I wasn't looking at the light anymore. My attention had fixed on something else. A feeling, really, more than anything visible. The hair on my arms was standing up. My pulse had quickened without any obvious reason. Every nerve in my body was suddenly screaming danger, the same way they would if I'd stumbled onto a rattlesnake sunning itself on the path. "Maya," I said quietly, "I think we should head back." "Just a few more shots," she murmured, absorbed in framing her next image. "The sun is almost perfect." I opened my mouth to insist when I heard it. My name, spoken in my own voice, coming from somewhere ahead of us, past where Maya was standing. I froze completely, every muscle locking. That wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Maya lowered her camera, turning to look at me. "Hear what?" "Someone called my name." She frowned. "I didn't hear anything. Just the wind, maybe?" But there was no wind. The air remained perfectly, unnaturally still. "Is this far enough?" I asked, my voice coming out strained. "Can we go back now?" Maya wasn't looking at me. Instead, she stared toward a distant ridge, her body gone rigid. The camera hung forgotten in her hands. "Did you just call my name?" she whispered, barely audible. "No." My voice sounded hollow in the stillness. Her face went pale. Slowly, maintaining eye contact with whatever she was seeing, she turned toward me. Her eyes moved beyond my shoulder, widening with confusion that rapidly shifted to fear. Pure, instinctive fear. "There's someone standing behind you," she said, her voice shaking. I turned slowly, my heart beginning to pound, and looked up at the ridge about 50 yards away. Standing there, silhouetted against the fiery sunset, was a figure, a human figure. And as my eyes adjusted to make out the details, my heart slammed against my chest so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. It was me. Not someone who looked like me. Not a distant cousin or stranger with similar features. It was exactly me. My height, my build, my face, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. The figure stood perfectly motionless, unblinking, staring down at us with empty eyes that reflected the dying sunlight. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, cycling through rational explanations that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Hallucination? No, Maya saw it too. Trick of light? The figure was too solid, too real. My mouth went dry. Every story my grandmother had ever told me, every warning I dismissed as superstition, rushed back with terrible clarity. "Who is that?" Maya whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Why does he look exactly like you?" I couldn't answer, couldn't make my throat work. The pouch of corn pollen in my pocket seemed to burn against my leg. The figure on the ridge tilted its head slowly, studying us with an expression that was almost curious. The movement was wrong, too deliberate, too measured, like something that had learned to imitate human motion but hadn't quite mastered the subtlety of it. "Maya," I managed, my voice coming out as a rasp. Don't take your eyes off me, the real me. Stay close. What is that thing? She asked, and I could hear the edge of hysteria creeping into her voice. Before I could answer, Maya tensed beside me. You called my name, she said. Just now, I heard you say it. No, I said firmly, ice flooding my veins. I didn't say anything, that wasn't me. We both turned back toward the ridge. The figure was still there, but now I could see its lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear from this distance. Maya made a small, frightened sound. It's mouthing my name, she breathed. Oh God, it's saying my name over and over. The figure on the ridge raised one hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed directly at us. At Maya specifically. The gesture was unmistakable, claiming, "We need to leave," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Slowly. Don't run yet. Keep facing it. Maya nodded jerkily, her breathing rapid and shallow. We stepped backward carefully, maintaining eye contact with the figure on the ridge. But as we moved, so did it, matching each step with unnatural precision. When we stopped, it stopped. When we moved, it moved. A grotesque mirror. Then, without warning, it descended from the ridge. Not walking down the slope the way a normal person would, but moving with that same stiff, jerky quality like a puppet being manipulated by invisible strings. Its legs bent at slightly wrong angles. Its arms swung without rhythm. Faster, I urged, my hand finding Maya's and gripping tight. Move faster. The figure picked up speed, closing the distance between us with terrible efficiency. Maya whimpered beside me, her fingers crushing mine. I reached into my pocket with my free hand, pulling out the leather pouch my grandmother had given me. The figure's eyes, my eyes, but empty of everything that made them mine, locked onto the pouch. Its expression shifted, becoming less familiar, less human. Something ancient and hungry flickered across its stolen face. Maya, when I tell you, I whispered urgently, turn around and run to the car as fast as you can. Don't look back. No matter what you hear, don't look back. Do you understand? I can't leave you. You have to. It wants me, not you. Run. The figure was 30 yards away now. 25. I could see details I didn't want to see. The way its skin seemed slightly too tight. The way its breathing was just barely out of sync with natural rhythm. And its smile. God help me. It was smiling now. And that smile was wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. Then it opened its mouth and called out in a perfect imitation of my voice. Maya. Wait for me, Maya. The sound of my own voice saying those words, coming from that thing, made bile rise in my throat. Run, I shouted, and Maya took off like a sprinter, her camera forgotten in the dust. The figure's attention snapped to her fleeing form, and it surged forward. I stepped into its path, fumbling with the pouch, spilling corn pollen into my shaking hand. The figure's eyes met mine, and in that moment I saw recognition. It knew me, remembered me from when I was 8 years old, from that missing gap in my memory. I threw the pollen into the air between us and shouted words my grandmother had taught me years ago. Words in Navajo that I'd never fully understood, but had somehow never forgotten. The protection prayer. The banishment chant. The figure stopped as if it had hit an invisible wall. Its face contorted, and a sound tore from its throat, horrible, guttural, nothing like a human voice. More like grinding stone and tearing metal mixed with an animal's death scream. It clawed at the air where the pollen drifted, hissing and spitting. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, legs burning, lungs aching, feet pounding against the hard desert earth. Behind me, I could hear it recovering, hear the pursuit resuming with renewed fury. The car was ahead, Maya already inside, screaming my name through the windshield. The distance closed too slowly. My chest burned. My legs felt like lead. The footsteps behind me were getting louder, closer, and I could hear breathing that sounded like wind through a cave, hollow and endless. 10 feet from the car. 5 feet. 3. I threw myself at the driver's side door, yanked it open, and dove inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. The figure reached the car just as the engine roared to life. It pressed against the window, its face my face inches from mine, separated only by glass. Up close I could see the truth of what it was. The skin wasn't quite right. The eyes were my eyes, but they were flat. like photographs of eyes rather than living organs. And when it smiled, I saw teeth that were just slightly too perfect, too uniform, like someone had carved them from porcelain based on a description of human teeth without ever seeing real ones. It raised one hand slowly, palm pressed flat against the glass, fingers spreading in a gesture that might have been pleading or threatening. Its mouth moved, forming words. Come back. Come back to me. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning wildly on loose gravel. The figure didn't move, didn't chase. It simply stood there in the cloud of dust we left behind, watching us retreat, watching and smiling that terrible smile. Even as the distance grew, even as we hit the highway and I pushed the accelerator to the floor, I could feel its eyes on us. Mia sat curled against the passenger door, arms wrapped tight around herself, making small broken sounds that weren't quite crying. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that would make sense of what we'd just seen, what we'd just escaped from. We drove back to my grandmother's house in complete silence. The sun had set fully, leaving us in darkness broken only by our headlights cutting through the desert. Every shadow seemed threatening now. Every shape in the distance looked like it might be following us. When we finally pulled into the dirt driveway, my grandmother was already standing on the porch, lantern in hand. She didn't look surprised, didn't look confused. She simply looked sad and resigned, the way someone looks when a feared thing has finally come to pass. Inside, she said simply, quickly. The house was prepared. Sage and juniper burned in multiple bowls. Turquoise stones had been placed at every window and door. Sacred corn pollen marked the threshold. My grandmother had known we'd need protection even before we returned. Maya collapsed onto the sofa, shaking uncontrollably. My grandmother brought her water and a blanket, speaking softly in Navajo words meant to calm and protect. Then she turned to me, her face grave. "Tell me everything," she commanded. I recounted it all. The stillness, hearing my name in my own voice, the figure on the ridge identical to me, how it had pursued us, the corn pollen that stopped it temporarily. Maya stayed silent throughout, staring at nothing, wrapped in the blanket. My grandmother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back heavily, suddenly looking every year of her age. "It wore your skin once before," she said quietly. "When you were 8, you went missing for 3 hours. We found you wandering back at dusk, but you weren't you anymore. Your eyes were empty. You spoke in voices that weren't yours. You wore clothes we'd never seen." She paused, gathering herself. "We did the same ritual then. Smoked you with sage, blessed you with corn pollen, sang the protection songs until dawn. Eventually the real you came back, but the thing that had taken you, walked in your skin, learned your shape. It never forgot you." "What is it?" Maya finally spoke, her voice small and broken. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. "Our people have names for it. Many names. But names give power, so I won't speak them here. What you need to understand is this. It's a practitioner who gave up their humanity for power. They can take the form of anyone they've touched, anyone whose essence they've tasted. And once they choose you, they never forget." "Why did it want me?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Because you got away," she said simply. "Because last time we pulled you back before it could fully consume you. It's been waiting all these years for you to return, to finish what it started. Tonight it almost succeeded." Maya spoke up, her voice steadier now but haunted. "It called my name. It knew my name even though I've never been here before. It learned your name from him," my grandmother said, gesturing to me. "It can access memories, pull out information. That's how it hunts. It uses your voice, your loved ones' names, your familiar shape to draw others in." "Can it follow us?" Maya asked, the question I'd been too afraid to voice. "If we leave, can it come after us?" My grandmother shook her head slowly. "Its power is tied to sacred places it's corrupted. Away from Shiprock, away from this land it weakens. But," she looked directly at me, her eyes hard, "you can never come back here again. Never. If you return to this land, it will be waiting. It will find you. And next time, you might not escape." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Never return. Never see my grandmother again. Never visit the land of my ancestors. Never walk where my people had walked for centuries. The thing had taken more than just 3 hours of my childhood. It had taken my home. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. My grandmother reached across and took my hand. "You survived. That's what matters. Some prices are worth paying." We stayed the rest of the night in her house, neither Maya nor I sleeping, watching the windows as shadows moved outside. At dawn, we packed quickly. My grandmother gave me more corn pollen, more turquoise, small protections I knew I'd carry forever. Our goodbye on the porch was silent. What could be said? She held me close, whispered blessings, and then watched as we drove away. Maya and I left New Mexico that same day, driving north without stopping except for gas and bathroom breaks. We didn't discuss what happened, didn't try to rationalize it. Some things exist beyond explanation, beyond rational thought. We moved to Washington State, as far from the desert as we could get. Maya never asked to visit my family again, never spoke of wanting to understand my heritage. The photos she'd taken that day remained on her camera's memory card, untouched, until eventually she deleted them without looking at them. But even now, years later, living in the wet green of the Pacific Northwest, I keep certain precautions. Mirrors face the walls in our home. I never look at my reflection for too long. I never say its name, never speak of the specifics of what I saw, because I remember my grandmother's final warning, whispered as we said goodbye. "It wore your skin once. Part of you will always be connected to it. It knows your shape, knows your voice. As long as you stay away, you're safe. But if you ever return, if you ever set foot on that land again, it will know. It will come, and this time, it won't let you go." Some nights when sleep won't come, I think about that figure standing in the dust, watching us drive away. I think about how it smiled with my smile, how it called Maya's name with my voice, and I wonder if somewhere in the New Mexico desert, near the volcanic rock that rises like a ship's sail from the earth, something still waits, something that remembers, something that wears my face. I suppose I should start by explaining how this nightmare began, though even now, years later, my hands tremble when I think about it. I'm a woman, and back in 2017, I was just 20 years old, a college student working as a trail guide in a nature reserve deep in the Georgia wilderness. The pay wasn't great, but I loved being outdoors, loved the ancient trees and the way sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden streams. I thought I understood the wilderness. I thought I was safe there. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when everything changed. I'd taken my dog, a German Shepherd mix named Bandit, out for what should have been a routine walk along the Sweetwater Trail. The air was thick and humid, carrying the earthy scent of decaying leaves and wet soil. Bandit loved these walks, his tail wagging as he sniffed at every root and stone. Then we heard it. A single gunshot, sharp and violent, tearing through the peaceful quiet of the forest. The sound echoed between the trees, and every bird within a mile went silent. Bandit's ears flattened against his skull, and he looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes, waiting for instruction. I should have turned back. God, I should have just turned around and gone straight to the ranger station. But I was young and stupid and convinced of my own invincibility. Hunting was illegal in the reserve, and I felt this surge of righteous anger. Someone was breaking the law on land I'd sworn to protect. We followed the sound, Bandit staying close to my leg now, his hackles raised. The deeper we went into the woods, the more my stomach churned with an anxiety I couldn't quite name. The trees seemed to press in closer, their shadows lengthening despite the afternoon sun. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat seeming to warn me to turn back. Then we found him. The man was crouched over a deer, a young doe, her eyes still wide and glassy with the shock of death. But what he was doing to her, I can't describe it without feeling sick even now. He wasn't field dressing the animal for meat. He was mutilating it, taking specific parts with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years of experience. His hands were covered in blood up to his elbows, and the smell of death hung in the air like a physical presence. He looked up when Bandit growled, and our eyes met. His face was weathered and hard, probably in his 40s, with eyes that showed absolutely no remorse, no shame. Just cold calculation as he assessed me. This college girl who'd stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen. His hand moved slowly toward the rifle lying beside him in the dirt. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, banded at my heels, branches whipping my face and arms. My lungs burned as I sprinted back toward my cabin, certain at any moment I'd hear another gunshot, feel the impact of a bullet in my back. The forest that had always felt like home now seemed hostile, every shadow potentially hiding that man and his blood-soaked hands. I burst into my cabin, slammed the door, and called the rangers with shaking fingers. They came quickly, along with local law enforcement. Within 3 hours, they'd found the man, arrested him right there beside his truck on an old logging road. They found the deer parts in his cooler, along with evidence of dozens of other kills. I'd done it. I'd helped catch a poacher. My fellow guides congratulated me, patted me on the back. For a week, maybe 2, I felt like a hero. But there was one guide who didn't celebrate. Iris, a woman in her mid-30s who'd been working the trails for almost a decade, had just given me this look when everyone else was cheering. Her face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd just shaken her head and walked away. At the time, I thought maybe she was jealous. Now I know she was terrified. 6 weeks passed. Autumn deepened, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. The incident faded into the background of my daily life. Just another story to tell over beers with friends. I had midterms to worry about, papers to write, trails to guide. Life moved on, as it does. But looking back, I can see the signs I missed. Little things that didn't quite add up. Iris stopped taking solo assignments. She only worked with groups now, families and school tours. When I asked her about it in the break room one day, she just mumbled something about preferring the energy of kids and changed the subject. Her hands had trembled as she poured her coffee. There were phone calls to the office too. Our manager, a gruff man named Vernon, would take them in his private office with the door closed. Through the thin walls, I could hear his voice getting tense, saying things like, "We run a legitimate business here, and I don't want any trouble." I figured it was just angry family members of the arrested poacher, making empty threats. I didn't realize how wrong I was. The trails felt different too, though I couldn't have explained how. There were days when I'd be out with a group, and I'd get this crawling sensation on the back of my neck like someone was watching from the trees. I'd turn around and see nothing but forest, hear nothing but wind in the leaves. But the feeling persisted, following me like a shadow. One evening, as I was locking up the office, I found a dead crow on the doorstep. Its neck had been broken, and it was positioned deliberately, wings spread wide. When I mentioned it to Vernon the next morning, his face went gray, and he immediately called someone, speaking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't quite hear. He swept the bird away himself, told me it was probably just kids playing pranks, but his hands shook as he disposed of it, and he kept glancing toward the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. I should have known then. The universe was trying to warn me, but I was 20 years old and convinced nothing truly bad could happen to me. That kind of arrogance has a price. It was a cold morning in early November when I saw the name on my schedule. Mr. Byron was all it said, scheduled for a 4-hour solo hike through the northern trails. The request form noted he was a man in his 50s, interested in scouting locations for a photography project. Solo assignments were rare but not unheard of. Sometimes older gentlemen wanted to revisit trails from their youth, needed a guide to ensure they didn't get lost or injured. These were usually the easiest, most rewarding jobs. Slow pace, friendly conversation, and the joy of watching someone reconnect with nature. I'd had no reason to be concerned. Vernon had looked at me strangely when he handed me the assignment sheet. "You sure you want to take this one?" He'd asked, his voice careful. "Why wouldn't I?" I'd responded, already looking forward to a peaceful day in the woods. He'd opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. "Just be careful out there. Stay on the marked trails." I'd laughed it off, thinking he was being overprotective. Now I realize he knew. He knew what family this man came from, knew the danger I was walking into. But he was too scared to warn me directly. Or maybe they'd threatened him too. Maybe they'd told him what would happen if he interfered with their business. Mr. Byron arrived exactly on time, driving up in a newer model pickup truck. He was exactly as described. A man in his 50s, maybe 6 feet tall, with weathered skin and calloused hands. He wore hiking boots that had seen better days, cargo pants and a flannel shirt beneath a worn canvas jacket. A professional-looking camera hung from a strap around his neck. His smile was warm and genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You must be my guide," he said, extending a hand. "Name's Byron. Just Byron. No need for formalities out here in nature." His grip was firm, his palm rough against mine. Everything about him seemed normal, friendly even. He asked good questions as we plotted our route on the map in the office, showed genuine interest in the local wildlife and terrain. He mentioned his late wife, how she'd loved nature and photography, and how he was trying to honor her memory by taking up her hobbies. I felt sorry for him. This lonely widower, trying to fill his days with purpose after loss. When he apologized for asking so many personal questions, explaining that he didn't get much chance to talk to people anymore since his kids moved away, my heart went out to him. "It's no problem at all," I'd assured him. "I'm happy to chat. That's part of what I'm here for." He'd given me that warm smile again, and we set off down the trail at around 11 in the morning. The November sun was pale but bright, casting long shadows through the bare trees. Most of the leaves had fallen, creating a carpet of rust and gold beneath our feet. Each step crunched pleasantly, and the air was crisp and clean in my lungs. Bandit couldn't come on official guided hikes, so it was just the two of us. Just me and Byron, heading deeper into the woods. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Byron moved slowly but steadily, pausing occasionally to take photographs of interesting rock formations or the way light fell through the branches. He talked about his photography, his technique, his plans for an exhibition at a local community center. He sounded passionate, knowledgeable, genuine. He asked about my life, my studies, my plans for the future. Where was I from originally? What was I studying? Did I plan to stay in Georgia after graduation? I answered easily, comfortable in his presence. I told him about my mixed heritage, Irish and Puerto Rican, about my family back in Michigan, about my dreams of becoming an environmental scientist. He listened with apparent interest, nodding along, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. But around the 90-minute mark, something shifted. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed it. We'd been talking about family histories, and I'd just finished explaining how my grandparents had immigrated from Ireland in the 1950s, how my mother's family came from Puerto Rico. Typical American melting pot story, I'd said with a laugh. Byron had nodded slowly, his smile not quite reaching his eyes anymore. "That's interesting," he'd said, his voice just a shade cooler than before. "Your family hasn't been here long then. Not really rooted in this land." The comment struck me as odd, but not alarming. Not yet. "Well, I guess not compared to some families," I'd agreed. "How long has your family been in Georgia?" And that's when his whole demeanor changed. His pace slowed even further. His shoulders squared. When he looked at me, there was something new in his eyes. Something calculating and cold that made my stomach clench with sudden instinctive fear. "Oh," he said, drawing the word out. "My family's been here a very long time. Since the beginning, you might say. We were some of the first settlers in what became the Georgia colony. Almost 300 years we've been on this land." "Wow," I'd said, trying to maintain the friendly atmosphere even as alarm bells started ringing in the back of my mind. "That's incredible. You must be really proud of that heritage." We were climbing a rise now, heading toward a scenic overlook I'd thought would be perfect for his photography. The trees thinned as we climbed, and I could see gray clouds gathering on the horizon. The temperature seemed to drop, or maybe that was just my imagination. Byron didn't respond to my comment right away. He just kept walking, his breathing steady despite the incline. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost all its earlier warmth. "Proud?" he said. "I suppose that's one word for it. Surprised is another. Surprised that my family is still here at all, considering how many tried to drive us out over the centuries." The air felt wrong now. Too cold. Too still. No birds sang in the trees around us, and I realized I hadn't heard any wildlife sounds for the past 15 minutes. It was as if every living thing had fled, sensing danger. I was only beginning to comprehend. "We're almost to the overlook," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's got a great view. Perfect for your photos." "Yes," Byron agreed. "Perfect. We should rest there. There's something I want to tell you. A family story, since you were so kind as to share yours. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I was still trying to convince myself I was being paranoid, that there was a reasonable explanation for why this friendly widower had suddenly become so cold and distant. We were in a public nature reserve. It was broad daylight. Nothing bad could happen here. God, I was so stupid. We reached the overlook, a clearing at the top of a rocky rise that offered a panoramic view of the forest stretching for miles in every direction. On a normal day, it would have been beautiful. Today, under those gathering storm clouds, it looked desolate and menacing. I sat down on one of the large rocks, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm the panic that was rising in my chest like floodwater. Byron remained standing, his camera forgotten, staring out at the view with an expression I couldn't read. "My family," he began, his voice flat and emotionless, "arrived in 1733. They carved their home out of this wilderness with their bare hands, fought off hostile natives who wanted to drive them back into the sea. When the British Crown tried to tell them how to live, tried to tax them into submission, they fought back. When the Union tried to destroy their way of life, tried to take everything they'd built, they survived. They always survived." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Something was very wrong. This wasn't just family pride. This was something else. Something darker. "They learned to live off the land," Byron continued. "Hunting, trapping, trading in furs and meat when times were hard. During Prohibition, they made moonshine in hidden stills deep in these woods. When that ended, they went back to what they knew best, taking what the land provided, what God himself put here for those strong enough to claim it." The way he emphasized God made my skin crawl. There was something zealous in his tone, something fanatical. "And no one," he said, turning to look at me now with eyes as cold as a winter grave, "no one has ever been able to stop them. Not the natives. Not the British. Not the Union. Not the federal government with all their laws and regulations." My mouth had gone dry. I couldn't swallow, couldn't breathe properly, because I understood now. I understood exactly what he was talking about. "Not some self-righteous college girl," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "who thinks she can tell people how to live on land they've held for 3 centuries. The poacher. The man I'd reported 6 weeks ago. This was about him." Byron pulled something from his jacket pocket, and my heart stopped. It was a handgun, compact and black and absolutely real. He didn't point it at me yet, just held it loosely in his hand, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard. "Do you know what that hill is called?" he asked, gesturing with his free hand toward a distant rise, maybe 2 miles away.
"The one directly south of here?"
I shook my head, unable to speak. "My family has always called it home. Everything you can see from here, all of it belongs to them, has belonged to them for longer than your family has been in this country, and they take care of it in their own way, the way they always have." He raised the gun now, pointing it directly at my chest. I felt my bladder threaten to let go, felt every muscle in my body lock tight with terror. "The man you reported," Byron said calmly, as if we were still discussing photography, "was my nephew. He was doing what our family has done for generations, providing for his own, using what God put on this earth for those wise enough to take it. And you, thinking you knew better, thinking you had some right to judge our ways, you got him arrested." "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face now. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please, I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't good enough," Byron said. "But my father, who leads our family, he's a merciful man. He said killing you would bring too much attention, too much trouble. He said there were better ways to teach you a lesson." He stepped closer, the gun now just inches from my face. I could see the bullets loaded in the cylinder, could smell gun oil and something else, something metallic and terrifying. "Run," he said softly. For a moment I couldn't process what he'd said. Run? How could I run with a gun pointed at me? "I said run," Byron roared, and the sound shattered something in me. I ran. I scrambled off the rock, my feet slipping on loose stones, and plunged into the forest. Branches tore at my face and clothes. My lungs burned as I gasped for air. Behind me I could hear Byron's steady footsteps, not running, just walking with terrible purpose. He was hunting me, just like his nephew had hunted those deer. The forest seemed to close in around me, every tree a potential hiding place or a trap. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, skinning my palms on rough bark and sharp stones. I scrambled back to my feet, whimpering, and kept running. But where could I go? We were miles from the nearest road, miles from help. And Byron knew these woods. His family had been here for 300 years. This was their land, their hunting ground. A gunshot rang out, and I screamed. The bullet didn't hit me, but it splintered a tree trunk just to my right. He was toying with me. "You can't outrun this," Byron called from somewhere behind me. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You can't outrun history. You can't outrun blood." I veered left, then right, trying to be unpredictable, trying desperately to remember my training about evading predators. But Byron wasn't an animal acting on instinct. He was a man with a plan, with generations of hunting knowledge passed down through his family. Another gunshot, this one closer. I felt the air displacement as the bullet passed somewhere near my head. I crashed through a dense thicket, thorns ripping at my exposed skin, drawing blood. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. My legs were giving out. I couldn't keep running. I was going to die here, in these woods I'd thought I loved, and no one would find my body for days, maybe weeks, maybe never. I stumbled into a small clearing and fell to my knees, unable to run anymore. My vision swam with tears and exhaustion. I heard Byron's footsteps approaching, steady and unhurried. He emerged from the trees like a nightmare made flesh, the gun still in his hand, his expression almost sad. "You really thought you could get away?" he asked quietly. "In our woods? On our land?" "Please," I sobbed. "Please don't kill me. I won't say anything. I'll leave. I'll transfer schools. You'll never see me again. Please." Byron walked slowly toward me, each step deliberate. "Kneel," he commanded. My body obeyed before my mind could process the order. I sank onto my knees in the dirt and dead leaves, my hands clasped in front of me like I was praying. Maybe I was praying. "Please God," I thought. "Please God, please God, please God." "This is what we do to people like you," Byron said, his voice devoid of all emotion now. "People who think they can interfere with us. People who think the law protects them." I felt the cold metal of the gun barrel press against the back of my head, right at the base of my skull. Every nerve in my body fired at once. This was it. This was how I died. 20 years old, killed in the woods by a man whose name I didn't even know. I heard the hammer click back. Time seemed to stop. Every sense sharpened to a painful degree. I could smell the gun oil, the decomposing leaves beneath me, my own fear sweat. I could feel the rough texture of the dirt under my knees, the way my wet jeans clung to my legs. I could hear a crow calling somewhere in the distance, oblivious to my terror. My mother's face flashed through my mind. Would she forgive me for being so stupid? Would my family understand how this happened? I heard Byron take a breath, felt him steady the gun. Then click. Just a click. No explosion. No bullet tearing through my brain. No darkness. Just click. But my body didn't understand. My bladder released, hot urine soaking my jeans and pooling in the dirt beneath me. Every muscle seized. My lungs stopped working. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Byron laughed. He laughed, long and loud and cruel, as I collapsed onto my side in the dirt, trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't do anything but lie there, curled into a tight ball, waiting for death. "It wasn't loaded," Byron said, his laughter subsiding into dark chuckles. "Well, it was. Just not that chamber. Had to pull the trigger 3 times before I got to a bullet." He walked around to where I could see him, crouched down beside my face. His expression was calm, almost friendly again, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. "My father said I couldn't kill you," he explained conversationally. "Said it would bring too much heat. But he wanted to make sure you understood the message, really understood it, deep in your bones where you'd never forget." I couldn't respond. My body had shut down, gone into some kind of shock. I could see and hear him, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Shallow breaths were all I could manage. "You report any more poaching in these woods?" Byron continued, standing up now. "Any more trapping, any more hunting, anything at all. And next time, all 6 chambers will be loaded." Next time, I'll pull that trigger until I'm out of bullets. Do you understand me? I managed the tiniest nod. Good girl, he said, and I heard his footsteps moving away, crunching through the leaves and undergrowth. Oh, and don't bother trying to describe me to the police. Byron's not my real name, and there are a lot of men in these hills who look just like me. You'll never prove a thing. Then he was gone, swallowed by the forest that belonged to his family. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours, probably. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows lengthened, and still I couldn't move. My body had betrayed me, locked in some primitive survival mode that refused to acknowledge the danger had passed. Eventually, as twilight began to fall, some animal instinct kicked in. I couldn't stay here. Night was coming, and the temperature was dropping. If I stayed here, hypothermia would finish what Byron had started. I forced myself to sit up, then to stand. My legs shook so badly I could barely walk, but I managed to stumble back toward where I thought the main trail was. Everything looked different now, sinister and threatening. Every shadow could hide another member of Byron's family, waiting to finish the job. It took me 3 hours to make it back to the parking lot. 3 hours of stumbling through darkening woods, jumping at every sound, convinced every moment that Byron would appear again. This time with all 6 chambers loaded. My car was the only one left in the lot. The ranger station was closed. I managed to unlock my car with shaking hands and just sat there for a long time, unable to make my hands turn the key in the ignition. When I finally started the engine, I had to pull over twice on the drive back to town because I was hyperventilating so badly I couldn't see the road. I went straight to the police station, filed a report with an officer who looked sympathetic but skeptical. They took my statement, sent officers out to search the area, put out what they called an APB for a man matching my description of Byron. But I could see in their eyes that they didn't expect to find anything. They were right. No one matching that description was found. No evidence of anyone being on that trail besides me. The officers told me they'd offered the arrested poacher Byron's nephew a reduced sentence if he'd give them names, tell them about any family members who might come after witnesses. He'd refused, said he didn't know what they were talking about. Vernon wasn't surprised when I called him that night to quit. He didn't try to talk me out of it, just said he understood and wished me well. His voice sounded tired, defeated. I wondered how many other guides had gotten similar warnings over the years. How many had quit without explanation. I spoke to Iris the next day, before I started packing to leave Georgia for good. She didn't say much, just hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm sorry, I should have warned you, but they warned me first, years ago. Told me what would happen if I talked." She'd been just like me once, young and idealistic, thinking she could make a difference, until someone from that family showed her otherwise. I transferred to a school in Michigan before the semester ended, moved back in with my parents. I told them I was homesick, that I missed seasons with real winters. I never told them what really happened, never told anyone the full story until now. Sometimes I still have nightmares. I'm running through those woods, hearing Byron's footsteps behind me, feeling that gun pressed against my skull. I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, and for a moment I'm back there, 20 years old and certain I'm about to die. It's been years now. I graduated, got a job working for the EPA in the Midwest. I've never been back to Georgia. I don't guide trails anymore. I can barely even go for a hike without my heart rate spiking, without that crawling sensation on the back of my neck that tells me I'm being watched. But I am alive. That family let me live, and that's more than I would have gotten if Byron's father had given different orders. More than I might get if I ever reported what happened. Because they're still there. Still hunting those woods their family has claimed for 300 years. Still warning off anyone who threatens their way of life. And the law can't touch them because who can you arrest when an entire family, an entire community closes ranks to protect its own? I tell myself I did the right thing, reporting that poacher, that protecting wildlife is important, that laws exist for a reason. But late at night when the nightmares come, I wonder if it was worth it. If anything is worth having a gun pressed to your head while a man decides whether you're worth the bullet. I don't have an answer to that. Maybe there isn't one. All I know is that I survived. And in those woods, in that family's territory, survival is the only victory that matters. My name is August Ellison, and in 1994, I went through something that still haunts me to this day. I was 32 back then, a high school teacher in upstate New York, specifically in the small town of Saranac Lake. My life was pretty standard, if not a little mundane, teaching world history to teenagers who were more interested in their growing collection of Pearl Jam CDs than the intricacies of the French Revolution. I'd just gone through a rough divorce with Sarah, my wife of 8 years. The kind of separation that leaves you questioning every decision you've ever made. The house felt empty, the silence deafening, so I took up hiking and occasional weekend getaways to clear my mind. Being a history teacher, I had a knack for details and an appreciation for solitude. The Adirondack Mountains became my sanctuary, their ancient peaks holding secrets far older than any historical text I taught in my classroom. One weekend in late September, my friend Nate suggested we rent a cabin in the Adirondacks for some fishing and relaxation. Nate was one of those guys who could make anyone laugh, even in the darkest moments. We met in college during a particularly disastrous freshman orientation, where he managed to set off the fire alarm while trying to make ramen noodles in his dorm room. Despite life's various curveballs, we kept in touch through letters and occasional phone calls. This was 1994, after all, before cell phones and social media made staying connected effortless. Our mutual friend Cal joined us as well. Cal was the kind of guy who always had a story, most of which involved some ridiculous misadventure that somehow ended with him either in a police station or winning a free meal at a diner. He was also the one who usually brought the beer, so he was always welcome. He worked as a radio DJ at the local station, and his voice had that perfect blend of gravel and warmth that made every tale sound like it was being told around a campfire. We left early on a Friday morning, the autumn air crisp and promising. Nate drove his old beat-up 1985 Ford F-150, its blue paint faded and rust creeping along the wheel wells, while Cal navigated with a wrinkled map spread across his lap. The drive up was filled with laughter and old stories, the kind that get better with each retelling. Nate had recently split up with his girlfriend of 3 years, so we figured he needed this trip as much as I did. The radio played a mix of grunge and classic rock, and Cal couldn't help but critique every song choice and DJ transition, much to our amusement. The deeper we drove into the Adirondacks, the more the outside world seemed to fade away, replaced by towering pines and winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. We got to the cabin around noon, the gravel driveway crunching under the truck's tires as we pulled up. It was a rustic one-story place that had seen better days, with dark wood siding weathered by countless Adirondack winters, and a wraparound porch that creaked with every step. The view, though, that made up for any shortcomings. The porch overlooked Lake Placid, its waters a deep blue mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains. Perfect didn't begin to describe it. The previous renters had left a stack of firewood under a tarp, and a metal fire pit sat in the yard, ringed by camp chairs that had faded from red to a dusty pink. After unpacking and cracking open our first beers, Cal had brought a case of Saranac, a local brewery he swore by. We decided to explore the area a bit. The cabin's owner had left a crude map marking some hiking trails, along with a warning about making sure to be back before dark. The woods around the cabin were dense, with towering white pines and thick underbrush that seemed determined to snag our clothes at every turn. The September air was thick with the scent of decay and renewal, fallen leaves decomposing into the soil, late-blooming wildflowers making one last push before winter. I remember Nate making a joke about finding Bigfoot, his voice echoing slightly among the trees. "Maybe he's got a summer home up here," he called out, ducking under a low-hanging branch. Cal, never one to let a good bit die, quickly escalated it into a mock-serious discussion about the likelihood of Sasquatch sightings in the area. He had that radio voice going, doing his best National Geographic narrator impression. Here we see the elusive Bigfoot in his natural habitat, apparently surviving on a diet of beer cans and tourist sandwiches. Typical Cal. The laughter felt good, honest, like something that had been missing from all our lives for too long. As the sun set, we built a fire in the pit, the flames casting dancing shadows across the yard while we cooked burgers on a portable grill Cal had insisted on bringing. The night was peaceful in a way that made me realize how noisy my life had become. No televisions humming in the background, no car alarms, no teenagers shouting across parking lots, just the crack and pop of burning wood, the gentle lap of lake water against the shore, and the occasional call of a loon echoing across the water. We stayed up late, talking and laughing the way old friends do when they finally have a chance to unwind. Cal told us about his latest dating disaster. Something involving a woman who collected ceramic clowns and insisted on introducing him to each one by name. Nate shared stories from his construction job, including a recent project where they found a time capsule from the 1950s buried in an old school's foundation. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with mist rising off the lake in ethereal tendrils. Nate and Cal decided to check out the lake, armed with fishing poles and a cooler of sandwiches. I opted for a solo hike, needing some time to process my own thoughts. The divorce was still fresh enough to sting, and sometimes being around happy people, even friends, felt like pressing on a bruise. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with water, trail mix, and my trusty Nikon camera, and headed deeper into the woods. The trail was barely visible in places, more suggested than marked, winding between massive boulders left behind by ancient glaciers. The morning light filtered through the canopy in sharp beams, illuminating patches of forest floor where ferns uncurled and late-season mushrooms pushed through the leaf litter. I was about a mile from the cabin when I stumbled upon what looked like an abandoned campsite. The discovery sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't immediately say why. There were remnants of a fire pit, long cold, with some rusted cans scattered nearby, mostly old Campbell's soup tins and what looked like beans, their labels long since rotted away. A weathered tarp, more gray than its original blue, was draped over a makeshift frame of branches, creating what must have once been a lean-to shelter. Something about the place felt off, like walking into a room where a heated argument has just ended. You can't hear the words anymore, but the tension lingers in the air. It wasn't just the decay, though that was unsettling enough. It was the sense that whoever had been here had left in a hurry. Personal items were strewn about, a moldering hiking boot, pages from what might have been a journal, too waterlogged to read, and strangest of all, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses bent at an odd angle, one lens cracked in a spiderweb pattern. I took a few photos with my Nikon, the mechanical click of the shutter unnaturally loud in the still forest. The camera was an f3, a professional model I'd bought myself as a divorce present, because if there was ever a time to indulge in expensive hobbies, it was after signing away half your possessions. Through the viewfinder, the abandoned camp took on an even more sinister quality. The way the light filtered through the torn tarp created strange shadows, and the scattered possessions seemed to tell a story I couldn't quite piece together. As I turned to leave, I heard something that made me lower the camera slowly, a rustling in the bushes about 20 yards to my left. The sound was deliberate, too heavy for a squirrel or rabbit. I stopped and listened, my heart suddenly keeping time with a woodpecker drilling somewhere above. The rustling ceased abruptly, as if whatever made it had realized it was being heard. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds had gone quiet. Figuring it was probably a deer, though I didn't quite believe that, I made my way back to the cabin, walking faster than I'd care to admit. That evening I told Nate and Cal about the campsite while we sat around the fire. The sun had set behind the mountains, leaving the lake a sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the first stars. Nate shrugged it off, more interested in describing the massive base that had gotten away from him that afternoon. I swear it was like trying to reel in a Volkswagen. But Cal's reaction was different. Always the storyteller, he leaned forward in his chair, the firelight casting dramatic shadows across his face as he speculated about the site's origins. Could have been a hermit, he mused, taking a long pull from his beer. Or maybe a fugitive. Remember that prison break in Dannemora back in '91? Not all of those guys were caught. This launched us into a discussion about various local legends, escaped convicts, hermits driven mad by isolation, and even a story about a group of hikers who disappeared in these woods back in the '70s, leaving behind only a single boot and a camera with unexposed film. Around midnight we heard it for the first time. We were deep into our third or fourth round of cards. Poker played with pretzels instead of chips, because Cal kept eating his winnings, when there was a noise outside. It was a distinct heavy thud, like something substantial being dropped onto the porch, followed by what sounded like shuffling footsteps. The sound cut through our laughter like a knife, leaving in silence broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Nate grabbed his Maglite, a heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a weapon if needed. Cal and I followed him to the door, more curious than concerned, though I noticed Cal had picked up the fireplace poker on his way. The night was moonless, the kind of darkness that seems to swallow light rather than be illuminated by it. We circled the cabin, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like solid things. The air had grown colder, and our breath came out in visible puffs that caught the light. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed, though I noticed some of the firewood had been scattered from its pile, as if something had rummaged through it. Nate chalked it up to a raccoon, or maybe a bear, which made sense given the location. Probably smelled those burgers we cooked earlier, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Cal was uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier storytelling bravado replaced by watchful silence. We reinforced the woodpile and headed back inside, double-checking the locks, though the cabin's ancient deadbolts didn't inspire much confidence. The next day dawned bright and clear, and in the morning light our midnight fears seemed almost silly. We decided to hike to a nearby waterfall that Nate had read about in the rental cabin's dog-eared guidebook. The trail was rough, unmarked in places, but the scenery was worth every stumble and wrong turn. Dense forest occasionally gave way to sunny clearings carpeted with late-blooming asters and goldenrod. The distant sound of rushing water grew louder as we approached our destination, and the air became noticeably cooler, heavy with mist from the falls. But something was off about this section of forest. The trees here had strange markings, deep scratches or gouges that ran vertically up the trunks, some of them easily 8 or 9 feet off the ground. They were too systematic to be natural, too high to be from any black bear I'd ever heard of. The marks looked fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored where the bark had been stripped away. I took a few photos with my Nikon, the mechanical click of the shutter unnaturally loud in the still forest. The camera was an F3, a professional model I'd bought myself as a divorce present, because if there was ever a time to indulge in expensive hobbies, it was after signing away half your possessions. Through the viewfinder, the abandoned camp took on an even more sinister quality. The way the light filtered through the torn tarp created strange shadows, and the scattered possessions seemed to tell a story I couldn't quite piece together. As I turned to leave, I heard something that made me lower the camera slowly, a rustling in the bushes about 20 yards to my left. The sound was deliberate, too heavy for a squirrel or rabbit. I stopped and listened, my heart suddenly keeping time with a woodpecker drilling somewhere above. The rustling ceased abruptly, as if whatever made it had realized it was being heard. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds had gone quiet, figuring it was probably a deer, though I didn't quite believe that. I made my way back to the cabin, walking faster than I'd care to admit. That evening I told Nate and Cal about the campsite while we sat around the fire. The sun had set behind the mountains, leaving the lake a sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the first stars. Nate shrugged it off, more interested in describing the massive base that had gotten away from him that afternoon. I swear, it was like trying to reel in a Volkswagen. But Cal's reaction was different. Always the storyteller, he leaned forward in his chair, the firelight casting dramatic shadows across his face as he speculated about the site's origins. Could have been a hermit, he mused, taking a long pull from his beer. Or maybe a fugitive. Remember that prison break in Dannemora back in '91? Not all of those guys were caught. This launched us into a discussion about various local legends, escaped convicts, hermits driven mad by isolation, and even a story about a group of hikers who disappeared in these woods back in the '70s, leaving behind only a single boot and a camera with unexposed film. Around midnight, we heard it for the first time. We were deep into our 3rd or 4th round of cards. Poker played with pretzels instead of chips because Cal kept eating his winnings. When there was a noise outside. It was a distinct, heavy thud, like something substantial being dropped onto the porch, followed by what sounded like shuffling footsteps. The sound cut through our laughter like a knife, leaving in silence broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Nate grabbed his Maglite, a heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a weapon if needed. Cal and I followed him to the door, more curious than concerned, though I noticed Cal had picked up the fireplace poker on his way. The night was moonless, the kind of darkness that seems to swallow light rather than be illuminated by it. We circled the cabin, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like solid things. The air had grown colder, and our breath came out in visible puffs that caught the light. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed, though I noticed some of the firewood had been scattered from its pile, as if something had rummaged through it. Nate chalked it up to a raccoon, or maybe a bear, which made sense given the location. Probably smelled those burgers we cooked earlier, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Cal was uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier storytelling bravado replaced by watchful silence. We reinforced the woodpile and headed back inside, double-checking the locks, though the cabin's ancient deadbolts didn't inspire much confidence. The next day dawned bright and clear, and in the morning light, our midnight fears seemed almost silly. We decided to hike to a nearby waterfall that Nate had read about in the rental cabin's dog-eared guidebook. The trail was rough, unmarked in places, but the scenery was worth every stumble and wrong turn. Dense forest occasionally gave way to sunny clearings carpeted with late-blooming asters and goldenrod. The distant sound of rushing water grew louder as we approached our destination, and the air became noticeably cooler, heavy with mist from the falls. But something was off about this section of forest. The trees here had strange markings, deep scratches or gouges that ran vertically up the trunks, some of them easily 8 or 9 feet off the ground. They were too systematic to be natural, too high to be from any black bear I'd ever heard of. The marks looked fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored where the bark had been stripped away. I pointed out the markings to Nate, who joked about tree-climbing bears, but I noticed him looking up into the canopy more frequently after that. When we reached the waterfall, it was a magnificent sight, a 60-foot cascade tumbling over dark rocks into a crystal-clear pool below. We spent a good hour just enjoying the view, taking photos and trying to forget about the strange markings. Cal, ever the instigator, dared Nate to jump into the pool. Never one to back down from a challenge, Nate stripped down to his shorts and leaped in, surfacing with a scream that echoed off the cliff face. "Jesus Christ, it's like swimming in liquid ice," he shouted, his teeth chattering audibly. I caught the moment with my camera, Nate's head breaking the surface, water droplets catching the sunlight like diamonds, his face a perfect mask of shock and regret. It was the last normal moment of our trip. That night, everything changed. We were sitting by the fire, passing around a bottle of Jack Daniels that Cal had been saving for a special occasion, when we heard that noise again. This time it was closer, almost right outside the cabin. The sound was different, not just footsteps, but something that seemed almost deliberate, like whatever it was wanted us to hear it. Nate, with either liquid courage or foolishness coursing through his veins, grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the door. "I'm gonna find out what's messing with us," he declared. The temperature had dropped significantly, and our breath came out in white clouds that caught the firelight. But again, when we searched, we found nothing. Just darkness and the endless wall of trees surrounding the cabin. Cal suggested it might be kids from a nearby campground messing with us. But we all knew there was no campground within miles of here. We were alone out here, or at least we were supposed to be. We went to bed uneasy, the bottle of Jack considerably emptier than when we'd started. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the normal sounds of the cabin, the settling of old wood, the gentle creak of floorboards expanding and contracting with the cold. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that made the old boards groan in protest. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I got up slowly, grabbing the Louisville Slugger I'd brought for campfire games. The aluminum bat felt cold and inadequate in my hands. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the porch to the other, as if whatever was out there was pacing. I tiptoed to my window, pressing myself against the wall beside it before slowly peering out. The night was cloudy, but there was enough ambient light to see shapes and shadows. Something moved across the porch, a dark mass that seemed to absorb what little light there was. Nate and Cal emerged from their rooms at the same time, both armed with makeshift weapons. Nate with his heavy maglite, Cal with a fire poker. We didn't speak, just exchanged glances and moved toward the door. Nate reached for the handle, and I'll never forget the look he gave us before turning it, a mixture of terror and determination that I'm sure mirrored our own faces. The door opened with a creak that seemed deafening in the pre-dawn silence. The air that hit us was beyond cold. It was as if all the warmth had been sucked out of the world. We stepped onto the porch, weapons ready, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The night was still, unnaturally so. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the usual lapping of the lake water against the shore. We scanned the area with our lights, sweeping the beams across the yard and into the woods. The darkness seemed to push back against the light, making the beams seem weak and ineffective. We stayed up the rest of the night, keeping watch in shifts. When dawn finally broke, we found the footprints. They circled the entire cabin, deeply pressed into the soft earth. Each print easily 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. They didn't match any animal tracks I'd ever seen, and as a former Boy Scout and lifelong outdoorsman, I'd seen plenty. The prints seemed almost human in shape, but grotesquely large and deep, as if whatever made them weighed several hundred pounds. Nate suggested we pack up and leave, his earlier bravado completely gone. But Cal, his storyteller's curiosity getting the better of him, wanted to stay and solve the mystery. My swing vote went to staying, a decision I would question for years to come. We spent the day close to the cabin, not venturing more than a few yards into the woods. The sense of unease grew as the day wore on. Even Cal's usually endless stream of stories and jokes had dried up. We built up the fire as night fell, making it bigger and brighter than necessary, as if the flames could keep at bay whatever was out there watching us. Around midnight we heard it again. The heavy footsteps, this time moving in a deliberate circle around the cabin. We grabbed our weapons, the bat, the flashlight, the fire poker, and stepped outside. The footsteps led us to the edge of the woods, where our lights caught something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially hidden behind a massive pine. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, and broad, its body covered in what looked like matted dark fur. But it was the eyes that haunted my dreams for years after. They reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's, but there was an intelligence there, an almost human awareness that made it far more terrifying than any bear or wilderness predator. It didn't move, just stood there watching us. Nate, still running on what must have been pure adrenaline, took a step forward. I grabbed his arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Don't," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We don't know what it is." The figure held its ground for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, then slowly backed away into the darkness. It didn't turn around. It kept facing us as it retreated, those reflective eyes the last thing to disappear into the blackness. We practically ran back to the cabin, dragging the heavy coffee table in front of the door and wedging chairs under all the doorknobs. None of us slept. We sat in the living room, weapons in hand, jumping at every sound. The creature circled the cabin all night, its heavy footsteps punctuated by occasional scratching sounds on the walls. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the windows, we threw our gear into Nate's truck and left, not even bothering to clean up. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. Nate moved to Arizona the following year, claiming he needed a change of scenery. Cal quit his radio job and took a position at an indoor advertising agency in Albany. Our friendship didn't exactly end, but it changed. Some experiences are too intense to share, even with those who lived through them with you. Years later, I looked up reports of strange sightings in the Adirondacks. There were stories, of course. Every region has its local legends and cryptid sightings. But none of them seemed real until that night. I still have the photos I took, the abandoned campsite, the scratched trees, and even a few of the footprints we found that final morning. Sometimes I take them out and study them, wondering if there was something we missed, some rational explanation that would make sense of it all. But then I remember those eyes, that intelligent, almost human gaze, and I put the photos away. The memory of that weekend never faded. I still hike, but always with a group, always in well-traveled areas. There's a part of me that wants to go back, to find that old campsite and see if there's any evidence left of what we encountered. But the wiser part of me knows some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some questions don't need answers. And sometimes, the not knowing is better than the truth. I retired from teaching last year, and my students gave me a camping gear set as a goodbye gift. It's still in its original packaging, stored in my garage. Every now and then I think about using it, about heading back up into those mountains. But then I remember those eyes in the darkness, and I decide that maybe my backyard is adventure enough. After all, not all who wander are lost. But some things in this world want us to get lost, to venture too far into the unknown. And when you do, you might find something that's been waiting there all along, watching and wondering about you just as much as you've wondered about it. My name is Daniel Clark, and I am 74 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on the 13th of October 1997, but the memory of it still chills me to the bone. I was working as a delivery driver in a small town called Larkspur, Colorado. Nothing much ever happened there. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and the biggest news was usually about someone's dog getting loose. I liked it that way. Life was simple, and my job allowed me to interact with the few locals I hadn't grown up with. I was living in a modest 2-bedroom house, just me and my dog Boomer. He was a golden retriever, a big friendly goofball who loved everyone. We spent most of our evenings walking through the woods behind my house. Those woods were my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind after a long day of navigating Larkspur's winding roads and dealing with the occasional grumpy customer. That fateful day in October started like any other. I woke up at dawn, had my usual breakfast of toast and coffee, and headed out for my delivery route. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the trees were a riot of red and gold. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I loved living in Colorado. My route took me all over Larkspur and the surrounding areas. I delivered packages to Mrs. Henderson, who always had a fresh-baked cookie waiting for me, and to old Mr. Grimes, who liked to chat about the weather and his arthritis. It was a normal day, filled with the kind of mundane interactions that made up the fabric of small-town life. As I finished my shift and headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a vague sense of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. I chalked it up to the changing seasons and the early darkness that came with fall. When I got home, Boomer greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, all wagging tail and slobbery kisses. His joy was infectious, and I felt my unease start to dissipate. I decided to take him for our usual evening walk. Maybe the fresh air would clear my head. We set off down our usual path, the one that wound past the old abandoned cabin that everyone in town called the Ghost House. It was a crumbling structure, more of a ruin than a house, and kids would dare each other to go inside, but no one ever did. There were stories about that place, whispered tales of strange noises and eerie lights, but I'd never put much stock in ghost stories. As we approached the ghost house, Boomer started acting strange. His ears perked up, and he let out a little whine. This was unusual for him. He was typically a happy-go-lucky dog who didn't spook easily. "What's up, boy?" I asked, scratching his head. His reaction put me on edge. He barked once, sharply, then took off into the woods, yanking the leash from my hand. "Boomer!" I shouted, sprinting after him. He was fast, and it took all I had to keep him in sight. We dashed through the trees, the underbrush scratching at my legs. Suddenly he stopped, and I almost ran into him. He stood there, staring at something I couldn't see, growling softly. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw them. 2 kids, standing about 20 feet away. They were young, maybe 10 or 12, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that looked out of place. The boy had on suspenders and a button-down shirt. The girl wore a simple dress, but it was their eyes that stopped me cold. They were pitch black, like 2 voids staring back at me. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were lost, or playing some kind of Halloween prank. "Hey there," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you kids okay? Do you need help?" They didn't respond, just stood there watching us. I took a step closer, and Boomer's growl intensified. The boy spoke then, his voice flat and emotionless. "We need to come inside. Let us in." The girl's eyes never left mine, and I felt a growing sense of unease. "What are you talking about?" I asked, more confused than anything. "We need to come inside," he repeated, taking a step toward me. "Look, kids, it's getting late. You should probably head home," I said, glancing around for any sign of their parents. But there was nothing. The woods were silent, unnervingly so. "We need to come inside," the girl echoed, her voice identical to the boys, like they were rehearsed. Boomer barked, loud and angry, and the kids' faces twisted into something else. Their mouths opened wider than should have been possible, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. My heart hammered in my chest as I stumbled back, tripping over a root. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. Boomer stood his ground, growling and barking furiously. The kids advanced, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Get away from us," I shouted, scrambling to my feet. I grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at them, but they didn't flinch. It passed through them like they weren't even there. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be real. I grabbed Boomer's leash and yanked him back, turning to run. The kids' voices followed us, chanting, "Let us in! Let us in!" I didn't look back. Didn't stop until we burst out of the woods and onto the road. Gasping for breath, I looked around wildly. There was no sign of the kids, just the dark, silent trees. I hurried home, locking every door and window, Boomer still growling under his breath. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept seeing their eyes, those empty black pits, every time I closed mine. What were those things? And what did they want? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume not just me, but the entire town of Larkspur. The next day dawned bright and clear, the kind of crisp fall morning that usually lifted my spirits. But as I got ready for work, I couldn't shake the memory of what had happened in the woods. Every shadow seemed to hide those black-eyed children. Every noise made me flinch. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. I just couldn't face the thought of driving around town, wondering if I'd see those kids again. Instead, I spent the day pacing my house, jumping at every sound, and obsessively checking the locks on the doors and windows. Boomer seemed on edge too. He kept staring out the windows, growling softly at nothing I could see. His behavior only fueled my anxiety. If it had just been me, I might have been able to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it was some kind of elaborate prank. But Boomer's reaction told me otherwise. Dogs don't lie, and they don't imagine things. As the day wore on, I found myself drawn to the window, staring out at the woods behind my house. Part of me expected to see those kids standing at the tree line, watching me with their void-like eyes, but there was nothing, just the usual forest sounds and the occasional squirrel. By evening, I had almost convinced myself that I was overreacting. Maybe it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or some kids playing a cruel Halloween prank. I decided to try and put it behind me. I couldn't live my life in fear. I made dinner, watched some TV, and tried to act like it was just another night. But as darkness fell, the unease crept back in. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, startling at every creak and groan of the house settling. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by Boomer's barking. He was at the bedroom window, hackles raised, letting out a series of sharp, angry barks. My heart pounding, I got up and cautiously approached the window. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then movement caught my eye. Two small figures standing at the edge of the woods. Even from this distance, I could see the unnatural paleness of their skin, the old-fashioned clothes, and those eyes pitch black and staring directly at my window. I stumbled back, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the bed. This couldn't be happening. They couldn't be real. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10, hoping that when I opened them, the children would be gone. 1, 2, 3. Boomer's barking grew more frantic. 4, 5, 6. I heard a faint tapping, like someone gently knocking on glass. 7, 8, 9. Let us in, a voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. 10. I opened my eyes. The tapping had stopped. Boomer was quiet. Slowly, I got up and looked out the window again. The yard was empty. No sign of the children. But pinned to a tree at the edge of the woods was a piece of paper. Even from this distance, I could make out 2 words written in what looked like childish scrawl. Coming soon. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As the first rays of dawn broke through my window, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed help. Needed to know if I was going crazy, or if there really was something sinister happening in Larkspur. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello?" "Joel," I said, my voice cracking. "I need to talk to you. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do." There was a pause. Then Joel's voice came back, alert now and tinged with concern.
"I'll be right over, Dan. Just hang tight."
As I waited for Joel to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that by reaching out, by acknowledging what was happening, I had somehow made it more real, and in doing so, I might have put not just myself, but my friends and my entire town in danger. What had I unleashed? And more importantly, how could we stop it? Joel arrived within 20 minutes, his pickup truck rumbling into my driveway. He was my oldest friend, someone I'd known since high school. We'd been through a lot together over the years. But as I watched him climb out of his truck, concern etched on his weathered face, I wondered if our friendship was about to face its toughest test yet. "Dan," he said as I opened the door, "you look like hell. What's going on?" I ushered him inside, checking the street before I closed and locked the door. Boomer greeted Joel with his usual enthusiasm, but even the dog seemed subdued, his tail wagging half-heartedly. We sat at my kitchen table, and I poured us both a cup of coffee. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. Joel watched me with growing concern. "All right," he said once we were settled. "Tell me what's happening." So I did. I told him everything, starting with that first encounter in the woods. I described the children in detail, their old-fashioned clothes, their unnatural movements, and those terrifying black eyes. I told him about the nighttime visitations, the whispered demands to be let in, and the note I'd found pinned to the tree. As I spoke, Joel's expression changed from concern to disbelief and finally to a guarded wariness. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it held the answers we were seeking. "Dan," he said finally, looking up at me. "You know how this sounds, right?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "I know. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it either. But Joel, I swear to you, it's real. These things, whatever they are, they're out there, and they want something from me." Joel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's say for a moment that I believe you, that these black-eyed children are real. What do you think they want?" I shook my head. "I don't know. They keep saying they need to come inside. But inside where? My house? The town? I don't understand any of it. Have you told anyone else about this?" "No," I admitted. "I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. Hell, I'm half convinced I am crazy." Joel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "All right, here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to get some sleep. You look like you haven't closed your eyes in days. I'll stay here, keep watch. Then, once you're rested, we're going to do some digging. If these things are real, there might be other reports, other sightings. We need more information." I wanted to protest, to say that sleep was impossible with those things out there. But now that Joel was here, now that I wasn't alone with my fear anymore, I felt the full weight of my exhaustion. I nodded, grateful for his practical approach. "Thanks, Joel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He clapped me on the shoulder. "That's what friends are for. Now go on, get some rest. I'll hold down the fort." As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, Boomer at my heels, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Whatever was happening, at least I wasn't facing it alone anymore. I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and echoing whispers. When I woke, the sun was low in the sky. I'd slept most of the day away. I found Joel in the living room, his laptop open on the coffee table, surrounded by printouts and scribbled notes. "Feel better?" he asked as I stumbled in, rubbing sleep from my eyes. I nodded, surprised to realize that I did feel better. Not great, but at least somewhat human again. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the papers strewn about. Joel's expression was grim. "You better sit down, Dan. There's something you need to see." As I sank into the armchair, Joel turned his laptop towards me. On the screen was a forum dedicated to paranormal encounters. The thread he had open was titled "Black-Eyed Kids, The Truth?" "I've been doing some research while you slept," Joel explained. "And Dan, you're not alone. There are reports of these black-eyed children all over the country, some going back decades." I leaned forward, scanning the posts. They were eerily similar to my own experience. Children appearing out of nowhere, always asking to be let in, always with those terrifying black eyes. Some encounters ended like mine, with the witness fleeing. Others, "Oh God," I murmured, reading one particularly horrifying account. A man in Oklahoma had let the children into his house. 3 days later, his neighbors called the police after noticing a foul smell coming from the property. They found the man's body, described as desiccated, as if every drop of moisture had been drained from it. "It gets worse," Joel said quietly. He handed me a printout, a news article from a small town in Montana. The headline read, "Entire family vanishes, mysterious children seen in area." As I read through Joel's research, a cold dread settled in my stomach. This was bigger than just me, bigger than Larkspur. Something was happening, something terrible, and it was spreading. "What do we do?" I asked, looking up at Joel. "We have to warn people, right?" Joel sighed, leaning back on the couch. "And tell them what exactly? That there are evil children with black eyes trying to get into their homes? Who's going to believe that?" He had a point. If someone had told me this a week ago, I'd have thought they were insane. But we couldn't just do nothing. We need to talk to Sheriff Adler, I said finally. He's been in Larkspur longer than anyone. If there's been anything like this before, he might know about it. Joel nodded slowly. It's worth a shot. But Dan, we need to be careful how we approach this. If we go in there talking about black-eyed demon children, we're likely to end up in a padded room. I knew he was right. We needed to be smart about this. Okay, I said. We'll keep it vague at first. Ask about any strange occurrences, any unexplained events in town history. Maybe he'll volunteer something that fits with what we're seeing. We agreed to visit the sheriff's office the next morning. As night fell, Joel insisted on staying over. He took the couch, while I retreated to my bedroom with Boomer. Despite my earlier nap, I was exhausted. The weight of everything we'd learned pressed down on me like a physical thing. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something enormous and terrifying. Whatever these black-eyed children were, whatever they wanted, I had a sinking feeling that Larkspur was just the beginning. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, fitting my mood perfectly. Joel and I ate a quick breakfast in silence, both lost in our own thoughts about what the day might bring. Boomer sensed the tension, staying close to my side and whining softly. We drove to the sheriff's office in Joel's truck, the radio off. The only sound the rumble of the engine, and the occasional squeak of the wipers clearing a light drizzle from the windshield. The streets of Larkspur were quiet, just a few early risers heading to work or walking their dogs. Sheriff Adler's office was a small one-story building on Main Street, its white paint peeling in places. A single patrol car sat in the parking lot, gleaming wet in the rain. As we walked in, the bell over the door jangled, sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. Deputy Simmons looked up from the front desk, surprise evident on his young face. "Mr. Clark, Mr. Havers," he nodded to us. "What brings you here so early?" "We need to speak with Sheriff Adler," Joel said smoothly. "Is he in?" The deputy nodded, gesturing towards the back office. "Go on through. He's been here since dawn." Sheriff Adler was a man in his late 60s, with a craggy face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He'd been the sheriff of Larkspur for as long as I could remember, a fixture in the town as permanent as the mountains themselves. He looked up as we entered, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. "Dan, Joel," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "What can I do for you boys?" Joel and I exchanged a glance. We'd agreed that I would take the lead, given that I'd been the one to actually see the black-eyed children. "Sheriff," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. We've got some concerns about some strange occurrences in town lately." Adler leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp beneath those bristling brows. "Strange how?" I took a deep breath. "Well, I've been seeing some unusual things, out in the woods mainly, and I was wondering if there have been any reports of odd sightings. Maybe kids where they shouldn't be, or people feeling like they're being watched." I trailed off, acutely aware of how vague and slightly crazy I sounded. Adler was quiet for a long moment, studying me intently. Then, to my surprise, he let out a heavy sigh and opened his desk drawer. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. "It's a bit early," he said, pouring a finger into each glass. "But I think this conversation calls for it. Drink up, boys. You're going to need it." Bewildered, Joel and I accepted the glasses. Adler took a long sip of his own before speaking again. "You're not the first to see those kids," he said, his voice low. "Folks around here call them the black-eyed children. They've been around for decades, always asking to be let in. No one knows what happens if you do." I nearly dropped my glass. You know about them?" Adler nodded grimly. "My daddy was sheriff before me, and his daddy before him. It's been passed down, the knowledge of these things. They don't come often, maybe once a generation. But when they do," he shook his head, "bad things happen." "What kind of bad things?" Joel asked, leaning forward. "People go missing," Adler said. "Or they're found, changed, like something vital has been sucked out of them. And it's not just here. I've got contacts in other small towns across the country. It's happening other places too, but nobody wants to talk about it openly. Who'd believe it?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "So what do we do?" Adler's eyes met mine, his gaze intense. You keep your doors locked and you don't let them in no matter what. And if you see them again, you get out of there fast. That's all we can do. But there must be something more, Joel protested. We can't just sit back and let these things terrorize our town. You think we haven't tried? Adler snapped. My grandfather formed a posse back in '32 to hunt these things down. Half the men never came back. The other half, well, they were never the same after. Sometimes, boys, the only thing you can do is hunker down and weather the storm. We left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers, our heads spinning from both the whiskey and the revelations. As we climbed back into Joel's truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in way over our heads. What now? Joel asked as he started the engine. I stared out at the rain-slicked streets of Larkspur, the town I'd called home my entire life. It all looked different now, knowing what lurked in the shadows. Now, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, we prepare, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. Little did I know how right I was, or how much our lives were about to change. The black-eyed children were coming, and Larkspur would never be the same. The next few weeks passed in a haze of paranoia and preparation. Joel and I threw ourselves into researching everything we could about the black-eyed children phenomenon. We scoured the internet, ordered obscure books on folklore and the paranormal, and even reached out to some of the contacts Sheriff Adler had mentioned. What we learned was both fascinating and terrifying. The black-eyed children, it seemed, were a worldwide phenomenon. Reports came from every corner of the globe, spanning centuries. Some cultures called them changelings, others demons or spirits. But the descriptions were always chillingly similar. Children with solid black eyes, appearing out of nowhere, always asking to be let in. We set up a makeshift command center in my living room, pinning maps and articles to the walls, connecting events with red string like something out of a detective movie. It would have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so high. Meanwhile, life in Larkspur continued largely as normal. Most people were oblivious to the danger lurking at the edges of town, but there were signs for those who knew to look. More people reported feeling watched while walking their dogs at night. There was an uptick in missing pet reports. And always, there were whispers of strange children seen at the edge of the woods. Joel and I took to patrolling the town at night, armed with flashlights and whatever protective charms our research suggested might work. Iron filings, salt, even holy water Joel had convinced the local priest to bless. We felt a bit ridiculous, like kids playing at ghost hunters. But the memory of those black eyes kept us going. It was on one of these patrols, about 3 weeks after our meeting with Sheriff Adler, that things escalated. We were walking along the edge of the woods near the old ghost house, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The night was unusually still, no breeze stirring the leaves, no animals calling in the distance. Dan, Joel said suddenly, his voice tight. Look. I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. There, at the tree line, stood a group of children. Not just 2 this time, but 5 or 6. Their pale faces glowing in the moonlight, their black eyes reflecting our flashlight beams like pools of oil. We need to come in, they said in unison, their voices a chilling harmony. Get back, I said, fumbling for the canister of salt in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The children took a step forward. Let us in, they insisted. We're so hungry. Joel raised his flashlight like a weapon. Stay back, he shouted. You're not welcome here. For a moment, nothing happened. The children stood motionless, their black eyes boring into us. Then, slowly, they began to retreat back into the woods. But as they disappeared into the shadows, one of them spoke again. Soon, it said, its childish voice somehow echoing in the still night air. Very soon. We ran back to town, not stopping until we reached the safety of my house. As we burst through the door, gasping for breath, we found Sheriff Adler waiting for us in my living room. They're getting bolder, he said without preamble. It's starting. Over the next hour, Adler filled us in on what had been happening in town, while Joel and I had been focused on our research. People had been going missing. Not many, not enough to cause a panic, but more than usual for a small town like Larkspur. And those who were found, well, they weren't quite right anymore. It's like something's been sucked out of them, Adler explained, his face grave. They're alive, but empty somehow. The doctors can't explain it. What do we do? I asked, feeling helpless in the face of this escalating threat. Adler's expression was grim. We prepare. We warn who we can without causing a panic. And we pray that it's enough. As Adler left, promising to keep us updated, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something truly terrifying. The black-eyed children were done waiting in the shadows. They were making their move. And Larkspur, our quiet little town, was about to become a battleground. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Sheriff Adler quietly spread the word to a select group of townspeople, those he thought could handle the truth without panicking. We set up a network of watchers, people who could keep an eye out for any sign of the black-eyed children and alert the rest of us. Joel and I continued our nightly patrols, now joined by a few others who believed our story. We armed ourselves with whatever we thought might help. Iron, salt, religious symbols from half a dozen faiths. Whether any of it would actually work against the black-eyed children, we had no idea. But it made us feel like we were doing something at least. The tension in town was palpable. Even among those who didn't know the full story, people hurried home before dark. Doors were locked that had stood open for years, and parents kept a closer eye on their children. Larkspur, once so open and friendly, was becoming a town under siege. It was a week after our encounter in the woods that it happened. I was at home, poring over yet another book on supernatural entities when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly widow who lived on the outskirts of town. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking. "There's someone at my door. They keep knocking, asking to be let in. But when I look through the peephole, all I see are these black eyes." My blood ran cold. "Mrs. Abernathy, listen to me very carefully. Do not open the door. No matter what they say, no matter what you hear, do not let them in. I'm on my way." I called Joel and Sheriff Adler as I raced to my truck. By the time I reached Mrs. Abernathy's house, they were already there, along with half a dozen other townspeople who joined our makeshift defense force. The scene that greeted us was like something out of a nightmare. A group of children, at least a dozen of them, surrounded Mrs. Abernathy's house. They stood perfectly still, their black eyes fixed on the building, their voices raised in a chilling chant. "Let us in. We need to come inside. We're so hungry." "Get back," Sheriff Adler bellowed, raising his shotgun. "You're not welcome here." The children turned as one to face us. Their expressions were blank, but there was a palpable sense of menace emanating from them. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the children spoke, its voice unnaturally deep for its size. "You can't stop us. This town is ours now. Let us in, or we'll take what we want by force." "Like hell you will," Joel growled, stepping forward with a canister of salt. What happened next was chaos. The children rushed forward, moving with inhuman speed. We fought back as best we could, throwing salt, swinging iron bars, anything to keep them at bay. I saw Sheriff Adler fire his shotgun, the blast passing harmlessly through one of the children as if it were made of smoke. The battle seemed to last for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The children retreated to the edge of the property, their black eyes still fixed on us. "This isn't over," one of them said. "We'll be back. And next time we won't be so gentle." Then they were gone, vanishing into the darkness as if they'd never been there at all. We spent the rest of the night at Mrs. Abernathy's, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the town, we gathered to assess the situation. "They're getting stronger," Sheriff Adler said, his face haggard. "And they're not hiding anymore. This was a direct attack." "So what do we do now?" someone asked. I looked out at the town, at the place I'd called home my entire life. It looked different now, shadowed and threatening, but it was still our home, and we had to protect it. "We fight," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "We warn everyone. We prepare, and when they come back, because they will come back, we'll be ready." As I looked at the faces around me, I saw fear. Yes, but also determination. We were in this together now, united against a threat none of us fully understood. The siege of Larkspur had begun, and we were the only line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf us all. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and vigilance. We turned Larkspur into a fortress, lining every doorway with salt, hanging iron charms in every window. The town's one New Age shop did a booming business in protective amulets and sage bundles. We set up a 24-hour watch, with teams patrolling the streets and manning observation posts at the edge of town. Every strange sound, every shadow that seemed to move on its own, sent a ripple of fear through the community. The black-eyed children didn't return immediately, but their presence was felt everywhere. People reported hearing childish laughter in empty rooms, seeing small figures dart between houses at night. Pets continued to go missing, and there was a rash of nightmares that left people waking up screaming about black eyes and hungry mouths. Despite our best efforts to keep things quiet, word began to spread. Rumors flew about what was really happening in Larkspur. Some people left town, unable to handle the constant state of fear. Others arrived, drawn by the stories of supernatural activity. We turned them away as best we could, not wanting to put more people in danger. It was about a month after the attack at Mrs. Abernathy's house that things came to a head. I was on patrol with Joel, walking the perimeter of town, when we heard a scream coming from the direction of the old ghost house. We ran towards the sound, our flashlights bobbing in the darkness. As we approached the dilapidated structure, we saw a figure stumbling out of the front door. It was Billy Knowles, a local teenager known for his daredevil stunts. "Help me," he gasped as we reached him. "They're in there. They're real." Before we could question him further, Billy's eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed. Joel caught him before he hit the ground. In the beam of our flashlights, I could see that Billy's face was deathly pale, his skin clammy to the touch. "We need to get him to the hospital," Joel said urgently. I nodded, but my eyes were drawn to the ghost house. The door Billy had stumbled out of stood open, revealing only darkness beyond. But as I watched, I saw movement in that darkness. Small shapes shifting in the shadows, and the gleam of what looked like dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. "Joel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look." He glanced up from Billy and went still. "Oh God," he breathed. Slowly, the black-eyed children began to emerge from the house. There were more of them than I'd ever seen before, at least 24. They moved with eerie synchronization, spreading out to form a semicircle around us. "You shouldn't have come here," they said in unison, their voices a chilling chorus. "This is our place now." I fumbled for the canister of salt in my pocket, my other hand gripping my flashlight like a weapon. "Stay back," I warned, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. The children tilted their heads in perfect unison, a grotesque parody of childish curiosity. "Why do you resist?" they asked. "We only want to come in. We're so hungry." "What did you do to Billy?" Joel demanded, still supporting the unconscious teenager. A smile spread across the children's faces, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "We gave him a taste of what's to come," they said. "He let us in, just for a moment, and now he's ours." As if on cue, Billy's eyes snapped open. But they weren't his eyes anymore. They were solid black, just like the children surrounding us. Joel let out a startled cry and dropped Billy, who landed on his feet with unnatural grace. He turned to face us, that terrible smile spreading across his face. "Let them in," he said, his voice a blend of his own and the children's eerie chorus. "It feels so good. You'll see." I grabbed Joel's arm, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "We need to go, now." We backed away slowly, salt canisters raised. The black-eyed children, Billy among them now, watched us retreat but made no move to follow. Their eerie smiles never wavered. As soon as we were clear of the immediate area, we turned and ran, not stopping until we reached Sheriff Adler's house. We burst through his door, gasping for breath and barely coherent as we tried to explain what had happened. Adler listened grimly, his face growing more haggard with each word. When we finished, he sank heavily into his armchair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "It's worse than I thought," he said quietly. "They're not just trying to get in anymore, they're converting people." "What do we do?" I asked, the question that had become our constant refrain in the face of this escalating horror. Adler was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then he stood, a new resolve settling over his features. "We end this," he said firmly, "once and for all. He went to his bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound volume. "This has been passed down in my family for generations," he explained as he laid it on the table. "It contains information about these creatures, what they are, where they come from, and most importantly, how to stop them." Joel and I leaned in, hope kindling for the first time in weeks. The book was handwritten, the pages yellowed with age. As Adler carefully turned the pages, I saw diagrams, incantations in languages I didn't recognize, and detailed descriptions of encounters with the black-eyed children dating back centuries. "According to this," Adler said, his finger tracing a line of text, "the black-eyed children are interdimensional beings. They feed on fear and life force, and they need to be invited in to fully manifest in our world." "But Billy didn't invite them in," Joel pointed out. "He went into their space." Adler nodded grimly. "Which means they're getting stronger. They're able to exert their influence more directly now. So how do we stop them?" I asked, dreading the answer. Adler turned to the last page of the book. "There's a ritual," he said slowly. "A way to close the gateway they're using to enter our world. But it's dangerous, and it requires a sacrifice." Joel and I exchanged glances. "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Adler met my eyes, his gaze steady and sorrowful. "A life freely given," he said quietly. "Someone has to willingly give themselves over to the black-eyed children, but with the intention of closing the gate from the inside." The silence that followed was deafening. The implications of what Adler was suggesting were staggering. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves, allow themselves to be taken by those things, to save the rest of us. "I'll do it," I heard myself say, the words out of my mouth before I'd even fully processed the thought. "Dan, no," Joel protested immediately. "There has to be another way." But I knew deep in my heart that this was it. This was why I'd been the first to see the black-eyed children. Why I'd been drawn into this from the beginning. It had always been leading to this moment. "It has to be me," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I started this. I have to finish it." Adler nodded slowly, respect and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "If you're sure," he said, "then we need to prepare. The ritual has to be performed at the ghost house where the veil between worlds is thinnest." As Adler began to explain the intricacies of the ritual, I found my thoughts drifting. I thought of my life in Larkspur, of the peace I'd known before all this began. I thought of Boomer, my faithful companion who I'd have to leave behind, and I thought of the black-eyed children, of the hunger I'd seen in their eyes. I was afraid, there was no denying that. But more than that, I was resolved. If my sacrifice could save Larkspur, could save the world from these creatures, then it would be worth it. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across Adler's living room, we finalized our plans. In just a few short hours, we would make our stand against the darkness that threatened to engulf us all. And I would face my destiny, for better or for worse. The day of the ritual dawned gray and overcast, as if the very sky was mourning what was to come. We spent the morning gathering the necessary components for the ritual: rare herbs, specially prepared candles, and a knife that Adler said had been in his family for generations. Its blade inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. Word had spread about what we were planning, despite our best efforts to keep it quiet. A small group gathered to see us off. Mrs. Abernathy, her eyes red from crying, Tom from the hardware store, even old Mr. Grimes leaning heavily on his cane. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew it was important, knew that in some way the fate of Larkspur hung in the balance. As we prepared to leave for the ghost house, Joel pulled me aside. "Dan," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you don't have to do this. We can find another way." I shook my head, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We both know there isn't another way, Joel. This is how it has to be." He nodded, blinking back tears. "You're the bravest man I've ever known, Dan Clark. It's been an honor to be your friend." We embraced, a lifetime of friendship conveyed in that one gesture. As we pulled apart, I turned to find Boomer sitting at my feet, his tail wagging hesitantly as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. I knelt down, running my hands through his soft fur one last time. "You be a good boy," I told him, my voice thick. "Joel's going to take care of you now." Boomer whined softly, licking my face. I had to turn away before I lost my resolve. The walk to the ghost house felt like a funeral procession. Sheriff Adler led the way, the book of rituals tucked under his arm. Joel and I followed, carrying bags with the ritual components. A few other townspeople trailed behind, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and a desire to support us in whatever small way they could. As we approached the ghost house, the air seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe. An unnatural silence fell over the woods, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground. The black-eyed children were waiting for us. They stood in a semicircle around the house, their pale faces impassive, those terrible black eyes fixed on us. Billy was among them, his once familiar face now a mask of otherworldly hunger. "You've come," they said in unison as we approached. "Have you finally decided to let us in?" Adler stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear I knew he must be feeling. "We have come to end this," he said, "to close the gateway and send you back where you came from." The children's faces twisted into those awful grins. "You can't stop us," they said. "We are eternal. We are hunger itself." "Maybe," I said, stepping up beside Adler. "But we're sure as hell going to try." With that, we began the ritual. Adler drew a complex symbol on the ground with a mixture of salt and herbs, while Joel and I set up the candles at specific points around it. The black-eyed children watched us work, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and growing unease. As Adler began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, the air around us seemed to vibrate. The candle flames flickered and danced, casting strange shadows across the ground. I could feel a pressure building, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Then came the moment I had been dreading and preparing for. Adler turned to me, holding out the ritual knife. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. I nodded, taking the knife with a hand that shook only slightly. I stepped into the center of the symbol we had drawn, facing the black-eyed children. Their eyes were wide now, a hint of fear creeping into their expressionless faces. "I, Daniel Clark," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the unnatural stillness, "freely offer myself to close the gateway. I invite you in, but on my terms." The effect was immediate. The black-eyed children surged forward, their hunger overriding any caution they might have felt. As the first of them reached me, I brought the knife across my palm, my blood spilling onto the symbol at my feet. The world exploded into chaos. There was a deafening roar, like 1,000 voices screaming at once. The ground beneath my feet seemed to drop away, and I felt myself falling, tumbling through a void filled with swirling colors and shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. I could feel the black-eyed children all around me, their hunger a palpable thing. But I clung to my purpose, to the thought of Larkspur, of Joel and Boomer and all the people I was trying to save. How long I fell, I couldn't say. It could have been seconds or centuries. But eventually I felt something solid beneath my feet. I opened my eyes to find myself in a place that defied description, a realm of shifting shadows and impossible geometries, where the very air seemed alive with malevolent intent. And there, in the center of it all, was a pulsing portal of light, the gateway between their world and ours. The black-eyed children were all around me, their forms twisted and monstrous in this, their true realm. They reached for me with grasping hands, their mouths open in silent screams of hunger. But I had made my choice. With the last of my strength, I staggered towards the portal. The knife was still in my hand, its blade glowing with an otherworldly light. I raised it high, feeling the weight of 2 worlds on my shoulders. "It's over," I said, and brought the knife down. The portal shattered like glass, fragments of light scattering in all directions. The black-eyed children howled, their forms beginning to dissolve. I felt a tremendous pulling sensation, as if reality itself was trying to right itself. As the world around me began to fade, my last thought was of Larkspur, of the town I'd called home for so long. I hoped they were safe now. I hoped it had been enough. Then darkness took me, and I knew no more. They found me 3 days later, lying unconscious at the foot of the ghost house. I was rushed to the hospital, where doctors marveled at my condition. By all rights, I should have been dead. Instead, I was merely exhausted, with no physical injuries beyond the cut on my palm. Larkspur had changed in my absence. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the town was gone. People walked the streets freely again, without fear. The black-eyed children were gone, banished back to whatever dark realm they had come from. As for me, I was changed too. My hair had gone completely white, and there were new lines on my face that hadn't been there before. But more than that, I carried with me the weight of what I had seen, of the sacrifice I had been prepared to make. Joel and Boomer were there when I woke up, both of them overjoyed to see me alive. Over the following days, as I recovered, they filled me in on what had happened. The moment I had disappeared into the portal, the black-eyed children had vanished. The ghost house had collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but a pile of rubble. Sheriff Adler visited too, bringing with him the Book of Rituals. "I think this belongs to you now," he said, placing it on my bedside table. "You've earned it." As I sit here now, years later, writing down this account, I can't help but wonder if it's truly over. The black-eyed children are gone from Larkspur, yes, but are they gone for good? Or are they out there somewhere, waiting for another chance to break through? I don't know the answer, but I do know this. If they ever do come back, we'll be ready. Because now we know the truth. We know what's out there in the darkness. And we know that no matter how hungry the darkness may be, there's always a light strong enough to push it back. At least that's what I have to believe. It's what gets me through the nights when I wake up, heart pounding, thinking I've heard a child's voice whispering, "Let us in." But those voices are just echoes now. And Larkspur, my home, is safe. For now,